Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock. Welcome to the Community Social Mobility and Inclusion Committee. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public or press that have joined us today, either in person or watching via the live stream to this meeting of the Community Social Mobility and Inclusion Committee at New Shire Hall in Alconbury Weald. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures, tweet or blog during the meeting, but could I request that members of the committee and the public turn their mobile phones and computers to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm does sound, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. Item 1 is notification of Chair and Vice Chair. Nick?
Thank you, Chair. Would the committee please note that at the full council meeting on 10th of May 2022, Councillor Sanderson was appointed as Chair of the Community Social Mobility and Inclusion Committee and Councillor Cox-Condron as the Vice Chair for the 2022-23 municipal year.
Thank you, Nick. I'd like to move now to item 2 and start by welcoming Councillors Batchelor and Daunton, who have become members of the committee, having previously been substitutes for the Liberal Democrat group, and Councillor Jonas King, who's replaced Councillor Hoy as a substitute for the Conservative group. Sorry? Oh, you've replaced Keith Prentice. Yeah, thank you. Substitute. Yeah. Substitute, yeah. And you replaced as a sub. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Could the Democratic Services Officer report any apologies for absence, please?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, there were apologies from Councillor Billington and Councillor Gardner, who's here as a substitute. Councillor Prentice and Councillor Jonas King is here as a substitute, and also from Councillor Dew and Councillor Dan Schumann.
Thank you very much. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest while we're on this item? No. Thank you. Item 3 is the minutes and, sorry, Claire?
Chair, I'm not sure whether to declare this interest or not, but until recently I was a district council representative on the archives group. So I would like to be able to speak to that item. I hope that my previous role does not preclude me from speaking.
I'm sure you'll be fine, but thank you for declaring that. Thanks, Claire. So item 3 is the minutes of our meeting on the 14th of April, and also to consider the action log. We're being asked to approve the minutes of that meeting. Can I ask whether any member disagrees with the accuracy of the minutes at all? No. So I see no objection, so I'll sign them as approved. Does anybody have any comments on the action log at all? Jan?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, on the actual minute where it was agreed to fund 13 applications through the cultivation fund stream, it was disappointing that March Make and Men were allocated £2,000. As to date, they still haven't had it. Through Councillor Criswell, he did make inquiries the other day, and apparently there was another fund that they got some money from. It would have been useful if they'd actually contacted, your officers had actually contacted them and explained to them why they hadn't got the money. It's not a lot of money, it's £2,000. If that's happened in that small amount, are there other mistakes elsewhere across these funds?
Okay, thank you, Jan. This is really just about the accuracy of the minutes, but we'll certainly note your comment. Thank you. Right, item 4 is petitions and public questions. I don't think we have any. Is that right, Nick?
Thank you, Chair. No, there are no public questions or petitions.
Okay, thank you. Item 5 is the Household Support Fund. Just an update on the HSF, and this will be presented by the Interim Service Director for Communities and Partnerships, Paul Fox.
Thank you, Chair. I'll briefly introduce the report and the appendix. This report comes in 2 distinct but highly related parts. The first being the evaluation of the Household Support Fund that we ran from October 21 to March 22, And the second element of the report is the delivery of the Household Support Fund extension, or Household Support Fund 2, funded by the government, which is running from the 1st of April to the end of September 2023. And within that, in addition to that element, we will talk about how we're developing our local offer in the anti-poverty space that builds upon and addresses the weaknesses of the Household Support Fund approach. So in the paper, members are reminded of the delegations regarding the delivery of the Household Support Fund granted at the previous committee, that we have discussed the guidance setting out the restrictions in the use of the Household Support Fund this year, in particular, the requirement that 1/3 needs to be spent on pensioners, which is proving very challenging, and also the fact that the last Strategy and Resources Committee agreed a further allocation to support our local anti-poverty initiatives that go beyond the Household Support Fund approach, and that's in paragraph 2.1.4. I can update members on paragraph 2.1.5 in that £300,000 for an increase in income maximisation capacity in the whole system locally has now been agreed by Adults and Health Committee. That is from the Public Health Grant, and that meets the Public Health Grant conditions because of the wider determinants of health model that so strongly links poverty and the impacts of poverty to poor health outcomes. Section 2.2 of the paper is a summary of the key points of the evaluation, which are set out in its entirety at Appendix 1. I won't, the members will be delighted to now plough through the entire evaluation, or indeed that section, but I will, because it's a little counterintuitive, just speak to the graph at 2.2.5. That graph shows, attempts us to show if we're getting money to the right places, to those who need it most. And the x-axis, which runs across the bottom, actually has numbers going decreasing, unlike most graphs you will see. That isn't an error. That is because that x-axis is the index of multiple deprivation, and the index of multiple deprivation is 39 separate indicators of deprivation that are pooled together to give one score for each local area. So the very highest score there, 35,000, is the lowest deprived area, whereas as you move up, down, or up the scale, but down in number towards zero, more and more deprived. So as you go across the right of this graph, the areas are getting more deprived, and then across up and down, the y-axis shows how many applications are in each area. And you can see broadly there are two broad correlations there between about 0 and I don't know, 10,000. There is one correlation, and then the rate increases significantly about that. But the good news there is that there is a broad correlation between how deprived an area is and how much resource we managed to put into that area through the Household Support Fund previously. At 2.2.6, there are ACORN segmentations. These are consumer segmentations models for people and places widely used in marketing, and categorizes people into groups. Again, this shows that about 56% of people who received the Household Support Fund were in the financially stretched or urban adversity segments of that ACORN segmentation. None of these things are perfect, but they are useful indicators that we keep looking at to check we are trying to get the money where it is most needed. After the evaluation, we moved to the development of the Household Support Fund and wider offer through our approach to anti-poverty. And of course, the evaluation has informed that, and that evaluation involved talking to partners, our trusted partners, people who had received support from the fund. So the paper goes on to talk about the development of that local approach in addressing the limitations of the HSF. And these aren't limitations that we just locally believe are significant. These are shared with partners and through conversations with their local authorities. We believe that this sticking plaster approach, as it's called, of just giving money out is inherently limiting and does nothing to address the causes of poverty. So we are developing, using resource available through Strategy and Resources, the development of a less transactional, more personalised model that tries to address income and expenditure in individuals and the take-up of a wide range of services. And that's what we call the core offer that's set out at 2.3.7 in figure 2. So implicit with this is the recognition that the vital role income maximisation needs to play and the acceptance there's not enough capacity in the system, and that the need and the demand outstrips supply, and hence the call for resources from now granted from the public health grant. So without going through all of that, the summary is we're bringing together an overall delivery model that is set out at 2.4 as an approach to anti-poverty, and the recommendations to note are the evaluations of the findings for the HSF 21-22 and our updating delivery in year to date. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Anybody wish to comment? Philippa.
Thank you, Chair. Very impressive. I now need to set myself some homework and read it again properly, but I really find it very helpful to be helped around the XY axis. On a much more basic level, which I do understand, I think these are excellent. I'm so pleased. Whoever put them through, whoever produced these, please congratulate them, because they've come up with an image that actually does speak properly, I think, to the people we want to reach, unlike some of the previous ones. This is something that pops up on my phone related to whatever I've been going on with, I suppose. I'm going to make sure these get out to everybody. I hope they're all going out to the libraries. I'm going to take them out anyway, but I'm sure that my colleagues also will be quite greedy in attacking the pile over there. And it's good. I just hope we can get the message out there, because we know that rent for pension is going to be a big thing and is often preventing them from retiring and taking the well-earned rest they should have, or even working part-time. So thank you for that, and we'll do our best from our end, I'm sure. I speak for my colleagues. Thank you.
Of course. Paul.
Thank you, and thank you for the kind words. It's much appreciated, and I will pass them to the team who have been working exceptionally hard on this. Please don't just attack the piles. There's a box at the bottom. One of the things buried in the evaluation report is that word of mouth was a significant issue for our household support fund previously. Now, we believe a lot of that is the Schoolgate effect. And what we call the Schoolgate, and that we don't get that quite so much in the pensioners aspect of the household support fund we have here. But word of mouth is vital, and anything members can do, as embedded as they are in their communities, will be great, because we are struggling to pick up enough people who we might support. Thank you.
Henry, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the report, I'm looking at 2.2.4, which is on page 20 of the main agenda. We mention, or it's mentioned in there, that we're waiting for the census data from last year to be published in order to compare these results to the wider population in the UK. I wondered, I thought the census data had now been published. So if that is the case, are we able to, obviously not today, but subsequently compare our data to that of the wider population?
That is the intention. Census data has been published, or some early releases of the census data has been published since the very long lag times for production of committee reports that we enjoy. So yes, I mean, frankly, there's a balance between finding capacity to do that and continuing to deliver the household support fund as currently. But yes, that's constant review is on our radar, and anything we can do to check that we're getting money into the right places is the right one. But just underneath that, I think the visual at 2.2.3 probably, you know, is still valid and tells us where you have deprivation on the left and where our money's gone on the right. Sorry, the other way around. Tells us broadly it's going into the right places, but that comparison is valid and we'll do it.
So we'll go to Adela, Claire, and then Lucy.
Yeah, thank you. My question is again about getting elderly people to apply for this money. Have you contacted doctors' surgeries? And the other one I thought of was chemists. A lot of elderly people are on medication and have to go to the chemist. So those would be sort of focal places, I think, to have posters and leaflets.
Yeah, I think they are interesting places. We've asked our communities teams to sort of support dissemination locally. We haven't as yet formally gone through the integrated care partnerships, and that is our intention. One note of caution, I had to go to the doctors a week ago, and while waiting, I counted 63 different A4 laminated posters in that waiting room till I got bored and stopped counting. So there is an issue about how impactful one more is going to be, but that's not a reason for not doing it.
Claire? and then Lucy.
Thank you. Is there any way in which this fund can reach those pensioners who have a bus pass, but are not able to use it because there's no bus service and have to use taxis to go in to the doctor, to go to the supermarket, and are seeing the cost of a taxi journey increase significantly?
Absolutely. If they're struggling with their bills or their outgoings, they will be eligible for support. The eligibility criteria is quite broad, and it's a very low stress approach by phoning Age UK, our Cambridgeshire and Peterborough partners. So absolutely we can, and we have explored asking different services to write out to their service users. So talk to the Combined Authority maybe about how they might be able to write out, but there are always data protection issues about writing out to people with different organisations. But broadly, yes, they are eligible.
Thank you, Lucy, Hilary, and then Ian.
Thank you, Paul. It's a really interesting report. Lots and lots of fascinating stuff in there. I think the maps that you were pointing out on at 2.2.3 are really useful. I think what you say about the school gate is really interesting. And looking at those maps, I was wondering whether there is also a correlation with where we have children and family centres and where there's been quite high uptake in the past. It would be interesting to look at that. Thinking about that and what you were saying about word of mouth having been very important, actually in many cases, the equivalent of the school gate for older people might sometimes be church and faith groups. And I don't know whether you have been in contact with those in terms of getting this out via word of mouth, but actually they have quite good communications networks. So simply sending something to the diocese and various other faith groups might be a good way of prompting some of that word of mouth communication for this older age group.
Thank you. It's a great show. And frankly, one we'd missed. We'll get on it.
So Hilary and then Ian.
Thank you. So my very on the ground research on this was my mum phoning up to say that she was thrilled that she'd just got through to somebody, that it was a very simple conversation, that they just took her details and she's going to be in receipt of some money, is eligible for some money in receipt of it next week, and is going to be telling her friends about it once she'd got over the fact that she thought I was trying to spam her. So again, that word of mouth, but also Schoolgate can work too, because you can pass it on to your mum or your nan too. So, generational care. But I think, I just wanted to say thank you really, and we're on it.
Thank you, Hilary. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that I will be asking all my parishes to put these notices on the parish notice boards throughout my 25 villages, because I think that will help to get the message across. But I think we also need to look at, are we actually putting this in our mobile libraries, which is particularly important in rural areas, because there's quite a lot of the elderly population do use our mobile libraries. So I do think we should have a notice in those. And I would ask that we perhaps look at also putting an adverts in the local buses. I know we haven't got many in my particular rural area, but we do have the Ting bus, so it would be quite useful, because that's used by a lot of elderly people, so it'd be quite useful for these notices to be on there, because that would then let people be aware of this particular monies that they could claim. So I think the more we can get it out there, the much better it will be.
Thank you. Yes. In terms of libraries, I can't answer you directly. I will have a look. I can't say I've been on the mobile library to check. Libraries broadly are very well engaged. And I went to check myself. It's in its library recently, and they have a very large pull-up banner in the doorway. So libraries broadly well engaged, but I'll check about the mobile library, because I accept that the demographics of the user group for the mobile library might be appropriate. And we'll look at other forms of advertising, absolutely. And yes, please, at the risk of repeating myself, big piles at the end, if parish councils can get hold of them, that would be fantastic. We've done that through the Association of Parish Councils too. It was in their most recent newsletter.
Thank you. Just following up on that as well, that I went to visit my local community centre to check that they had the posters, which they did have, but they kind of got lost as well. So just nipping in and really just having that conversation about what they are. And yeah, they're gaining so many. But with my on-the-ground researcher, my mum also went to the library to update her bus pass, you know, so that's a really ideal place as well to initiate those conversations in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ros, followed by Bryony and Philippa.
I've got 3 questions. One is, I think it says there's 7 redeployed staff on this. I don't see well, I think we are pretty confident the cost of living crisis isn't going away. So, you know, what gaps is that causing elsewhere? I think this is similar to Councillor Batchelor's point. The graph on page 38, yes, that which shows the number of applicants by district, seeing that as a percentage of the total population data would be really helpful, because I was looking at the population data and the populations vary a lot across the districts. And the final point is, as a councillor, I wasn't entirely sure who to email to get these flyers. I knew I was coming here, so it wasn't such an issue, but not everyone's on this committee. So it feels like sort of member 365 emails would be really helpful, indicating, you know, who to email to get posters and flyers and whatever.
Thank you, and we'll certainly send out an email to members with a central point. They can get as many as they wish. We did send out the social media pack to all members. In fact, I remember writing to one member congratulating them for being the first to share it, because I was so pleased to see it. Could you just point me to the redeployment section? I must admit you have.
I might have made this up. Page 53, perhaps.
I'm on the paragraph numbers. I'll certainly pick that up with you. At present, the only significantly redeployed member of staff is from our business design teams. The group of people running the hub are now on contract, but they are on short-term contracts. So this approach isn't funded beyond the end of March 23 and will be subject to a business case in the next business planning round.
Okay, thank you, Bryony, and then Philippa.
Thank you. Obviously, I have to mention school vouchers and the system there. And I know, as you say, the school gates and the system works very well with that kind of thing. I know the team there have used an overtime model in order to get around the having time to deliver. And I know they have spent hours and hours working with the system. And I know, obviously, your staff do as well. And I thank you all for it. The figure 2.2.3, where it says distribution of applications, is that purely applications via the household fund, or does that include the school meal applications as well? Thank you.
Apologies, Councillor, I should have clarified right from the start. So the whole of this paper doesn't disregard the school meal vouchers, because those school meal vouchers are mentioned as part of the wider system model in the final paragraphs at figure 4, but all of the evaluation report and all of the financial figures I mentioned relate to what we call the household support fund. I know the government say we fund our school, it does get complicated. We do fund our school meal holiday vouchers with household support fund money, but where I talk about the household support fund in this committee, it's how we're doing the sort of responsive and proactive approaches that don't include school meals. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to.
Thank you, Philippa.
Yes, just to follow up on remarks by Councillor Gardner and others. I'm not sure what the County Council courier system is when it comes to getting leaflets out. I ended up just printing A5. There's only 3 mobile libraries, and that was a good idea because they haven't got very big walls, you know, and there is, as you say, a danger of overkill. But these on the counter of all 3 mobile libraries, where it can be just pointed to, you know, they can see it as they're giving a book in, nice and subtle as well. So it would be helpful if somewhere on the website, not really clickbait, but just a list of where do things go so we can check up. Because we're coming up with these ideas about the churches, and you'd have thought that was obvious because that's what we did in lockdown. And that's what I thought Cosmic was really good at, on building on the lessons we learned during lockdown of where people were, where they were going to go and who could help the networking. So it would be helpful if for officers as well, going from somebody from adults and health wanting to get a message out, what is there in the way of a county council courier network for the paper when paper is the best bet? I would really like to know the answer to that, because I've tried some things I've had to rescue from going to the wrong place and trying to get it back to where it should have been, because there are deliveries, but sometimes they're not going to the right place. Cambridgeshire Skills is another one, for example. So could we have a list somewhere that the comms people can point us to, and we can even make suggestions about, because I know they're very responsive to suggestions. I appreciate that.
I'm happy to check with comms colleagues if there's a core list. My understanding is that comms plans are developed, and my experience, relatively recent admittedly, is that comms plans are developed for each different initiatives, and therefore the distribution list is generated in a sort of bespoke manner. Part of that might be my ignorance as still a relative new voice, so I'm happy to go back and double check with comms and come back to you on that.
Okay, well, thank you. It's been a very good, very useful debate. And thank you, Paul, and all the team for the work you're doing on this. I think it's worth noting that Strategy and Resources agreed to allocate 1.87 million at its meeting on the 27th of June. And of that amount, £750,000 will be made available across 22-23 for local enhancement of the HSF. So well done to Strategy and Resources and everyone on that. So we're being asked to, well, I'll move both recommendations together, A and B. Note the findings of the evaluation of the operation of the government-funded Household Support Fund between October 2021, March 2022, and note the update on the delivery of the HSF and associated activity in the financial year 22-23. So these recommendations are just to note. So are there any objections at all from anyone? No, okay. So I see no objections, so the recommendations are carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 6, decentralisation. Our perspective on this. Over to you again, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. So the outcome of the intended through this decentralisation paper is to link the decentralisation activity and intentions that such decentralisation achieves services that are more closely reflecting the needs and wants of local communities and improve our decision making and therefore improve outcomes. I won't speak in detail to the paper, but committee is reminded that while some solutions do need scale, delivery design at local or hyperlocal level can often be the best approach to delivering even wicked issues that one sometimes perceives are only in the gift of national governments or pan-national approaches. Members are also reminded, as set out in the paper, that the strategic approach to decentralisation sits with Strategy and Resources Committee, and Strategy and Resources Committee most recently considered decentralisation at their meeting of the 7th of June. And agreed a set of design principles set out and repeated in 1.8 of this paper, and a series of next steps set out at 1.10 of this paper. Part of that meeting agreed to, on a series of pilots, to test the principles of decentralisation set out in 1.8 and 1.11 of this paper, to show and test what aspects of community co-design, deliberative democracy and shared resources might be achieved through this localism, local type approach. And more detail is coming back to Strategy and Resources Committee in September on what those pilots might be. Section 2 of this paper then considers the interface between our strategic priorities of Cosmic, such as anti-poverty, as we've been talking about, community wealth building, the Think Communities approach, and talks specifically about how the Think Communities approach is if you like, an early adopter of that decentralized model. It talks about the delivery mechanism of the Think Communities service as a organisationally agnostic systems glue. Terrible phrase, but it does describe what that team does. The level of interface for those workers on the ground is not the individual. They don't hold caseloads. They do work to put organisations together. And as the head of that service often says, they leave their sort of identity badge at the door in the nicest possible sense, the metaphorical sense, because it doesn't matter what organisation, in some ways they're trying to work for, they're trying to put things together from a bottom-up approach, working with local district council partners, parish council partners and communities themselves. And the paper therefore tries to distinguish between the Think Communities service and the Think Communities approach, because while the service can do a lot, it is the cross-cutting Think Communities approach that will help us deliver the aspirations of decentralisation. And I think the most recent organisational changes in senior management level, as considered by full council recently, will help us do that as well. So these are cross-cutting issues. And I think one of the issues in the past has been a default to the Think Communities service to deliver localism, where the scope and the scale of that service won't ever be able to do that, because decentralisation is a cross-cutting approach that needs to be embraced across the council. So part of the purpose of the paper is to try and reinforce that distinction. That is not to say Think Communities service shouldn't pay an absolutely core approach through the way that they deliver. And a reminder to members that there will be, again, as with the hub approach, there will be a business case to continue the Think Community service, to put it on a more sustainable footing as it is currently funded until March 23. Later on in the paper, 2.3 discusses the pilots and proposes that particular aspects of those pilots be overseen by this committee, the learning from those pilots, because they are so well aligned with particular aspects of the committee's responsibilities as set out within the Constitution. So in summary, we are building and have been building a place-based approach. And while I think community service will be a key aspect of that, our approach needs to be organisational wide, and I think we are making progress in that respect. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Philippa.
Written to Paul. Thank you. I think we all struggle because none of the words we use for what we're trying to do here is quite right. You know, I was brought up on subsidiarity. We've got decentralization as a key word here. We've also got localism, and we know it's a mix of all these things. It's trying to get make the best of what we've got in the way of resources and what people need. I've struggled since joining the council to understand the relationship between the community connectors, who are obviously part of the Think Communities team, and the district council community development officers. Now, I think most of the people around this table have a detailed understanding of both approaches, and indeed the very officers involved. You know, we've worked with our community development officers for a long time. In Trumpington, they've been paid for by the developers. And we know that they tend to work by helping to set something up and to actually deliver it, and then make it sustainable by finding people who can carry on the job without them. That's always necessary anyway with limited contracts. The Think Community slightly hands-off approach, oh no, we can't actually do anything, but we can tell you how to do it yourselves, can be a bit of a block right at the beginning of the conversations they have with some people. We understand what they mean, but not all members of the public do. They sort of then hanker for the district council approach, where they will actually come and help you set up the kitchen or sort out the safeguarding or whatever the technicalities are. I would like to be assured, Mr. Fox, on just exactly how the officers are required to work with their district council colleagues in community development or whatever the district council calls it. And I know that everybody's a bit different on that, because that's key for delivery and what people can benefit from.
Thank you. And I think I like subsidiarity too, but some people hate it so much that I've stopped using it. I think it's a fair comment. I mentioned earlier sort of being organisationally agnostic, and I think when these workers and these teams are on the ground, it shouldn't matter if a community group is talking to a community development worker, and that's effectively what they are from the Think Communities teams or from a district council. The distinction in my mind, though, is that each of those different services have a distinct bridge back to their own organisation. So what the Think Communities teams will do, will have a bridge back into this organisation, and should, in theory, and it's not always plain sailing, but we are getting better, have therefore smoothed the path to links with property, highways, whoever it may be. They are a bridge back into that organisation, whereas district councils will be a bridge back into their own organisations. So this is attempting to be gluing things together on the ground, and then coming back to find out, so that a community organisation isn't asked, oh, well, you'll need to speak to property about that and highways about that and finance about that. That's what we are doing. But you're right, in terms of the model isn't that we sit up and do. There is a capacity issue about not getting locked into running things. I think it's a fair challenge if you're telling me that the approach is so hands-off that it is negating potential engagement, that people just can't get there. The teams themselves wouldn't say that. They are passionate community development workers who want to empower people to do exactly the opposite. But it's a fair challenge, and I'll raise it. We have business planning meetings all this week, and I'll push that into the mix happily.
Come back, because I wouldn't want this to imply a criticism of my own local connectors, who certainly get it and do as much as they can. And I do agree that this is a bridge back on to centralisation in a way, insofar as our connectors are in a very good position to talk to connectors elsewhere in the county, whereas the district council officers might find that more difficult, or may not happen. I just want to know that we are requiring connectors to work very closely with the district council, and it sounds like we do, so that's fine. I don't think you didn't need to take it back further than that. Thank you.
Not at all. Always happy for challenge. I mean, if that's not happening in individual cases, it shouldn't be, but it's helpful to be reminded of that. There's always challenges with any kind of model, and it's worth us playing it through as we talk at the moment about service in future in each of this case.
Thank you, Jonas, then Ros, then Adela.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have to say I wasn't particularly inspired when I read this report. It feels like we've been talking about decentralisation for such a long time now, with very little progress. And then I read this report, and there still doesn't seem to be much progress at all. We talk about potential and principles, which we've been talking about for the past year, but no real progress. And now we're going to have to wait until September to find out what the pilots might be. So still no real decisions, still no real progress from what I'm seeing. But what are the challenges in actually moving this forwards? And when do you think we'll actually be making decisions on the actual pilots and launching actual pilots, rather than just another wishy-washy report of here's the potential? Let's start making some decisions, start seeing things move forward. So yeah, what are the challenges there?
I'm sorry, my wishy-washy report failed to inspire, Councillor, but I think that I would say that the purpose of this report isn't to move things forward, frankly. The report attempts to set out that it is the remit of Strategy and Resources Committee to move the strategic approach to decentralisation forward, and that the 20th of September is the agreed Strategy and Resources of the previous committee, agreed that the pilots would be brought forward to that committee. Within that context and the acceptance that the strategic lead is elsewhere, this report simply attempts to talk about the perspective for Cosmic and the perspective for the Think Communities approach and the Think Community service. So I accept this paper doesn't move us forward, but to some extent it wasn't intended to, because the scope of moving us forward lies elsewhere, in my view.
If I may come back, Chair, thank you. Thank you for that explanation. But when do you think it's likely that we'll actually be launching pilots rather than talking about pilots?
I'm afraid I don't have that information. But I can, again, as with other things, I will speak to colleagues who are going to be drafting the Strategy and Resources paper, and happily try and inform me.
Okay, thank you, Jonas. Ros, Adela, and then Hilary.
Councillor Murphy was very concerned about Think Communities, and that led us to have a meeting with some of the officers who are sort of structuring. And I'm really happy now that there are really good conversations happening between Think Communities and the district councils so that now they're working together. And they said that this perhaps wasn't the case 12 months ago, whatever, but now there's kind of much stronger models. And so, but I think that was a really useful conversation, and possibly offering all members of this committee an opportunity to sort of see what's going on would be really helpful to give us an insight into the way it's working. I mean, other people will probably see things that I don't. So yeah, that was helpful. So think communities. At the moment, yes, they do seem to be really focused on community development, and I've seen them in Orchard Park, and they're doing really good work. There does seem to be a tension with think communities being cited as the place where lots of services and lots of that, you know, that's the touch point between the council and communities. But there's only a limited amount of resource, and while they're focusing their resources on community development, that means that other areas which are not sort of strategic targets are getting that attention. And it does seem that there's a real, you know, it would be so I had a really helpful meeting. Well, I thought it was a really good meeting with Stagecoach, and they said, yeah, you know, we'd love to come to your community. And then since then, when I've emailed them, there's been absolute silence. And I recognise the Stagecoach are having problems. But if think communities were a place where every community could, you know, if they had that relationship, and then we could just go to think communities, that would be so helpful. Or, you know, making those connections between council services or services that the council connects into via the CPCA. And I feel that it's not obviously the case at the moment.
I think that's a fair challenge, but thank you for recognising the challenges of limited resources and priorities and everything else, that it often is. These are a group of people and a group of services that want to say yes, but they literally can't say yes to everything that comes along, and it is very difficult for us to prioritise in some circumstances, and for us to know when. Also, there's a genuine challenge of when the council should be involved and when we should get out of the way and things can happen on their own. So it is something that we constantly keep under revision, and if it's not working, you know, members can please do tell us at any time. But it is difficult to balance our priorities sometimes.
Thank you, Adela.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the pilot projects, because we're nearly a month down the line from the meeting of the Strategy and Resources Committee. And I just wondered if you had any idea of the number of pilots, where they're likely to be, because if you're, you know, and what are you coming back to us at the next meeting? Is it for us to choose where the pilots are going to be, or will we have some further information at that point?
The recommendations on the pilots will be presented to Strategy and Resources in September. At present, I have no idea how many that will be.
Hilary and then Jan.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to address concerns about wishy-washiness, really, and give thanks myself to this change of culture, really. And I understand that it is a change of culture about working in a more deliberative fashion and a bottom-up fashion, and that you know, it does take time to listen and to make those changes, and that it hasn't been, you know, the priority hasn't been a fast top-down delivery, and that is a change of culture. And I know that has, you know, affected the time that it would be sorted out. But actually, thank you for doing that and for listening. And I think that's a lot of feedback that we've had from other partners and stakeholders. And I value that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, and then Lucy.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I agree with Della and Jonas. Each time this paper has been brought to this committee, I've asked the same question, lots and lots of words, well-written words, but lots and lots of words, but no substance. It's been bouncing back and forward for over a year, now in the control of S&R committee. We need to get some meat on the bones. You know, it's just talk, talk, talk. Is it now time just to hand it to S&R and let them deal with it? So that they, instead of it bouncing back and forward here, because obviously it's officers' time, etc., etc. as I say, we want some meat on the bones. We want to know. I've got no feedback from Finland what you're discussing with them, if you're discussing anything at all. So I do ask officers, and obviously we do have the leader of the council sitting here, who obviously sits on SNR. Please get on with it, you know, and give us some substance, give us some meat, so that we know exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Lucy, you next.
Thank you. Well timed. So I understand the points that are being made about the time that this is taken. I think Hilary is right. It's right to take some time over it. It's an important process. And it is a process. It's not going to be something which is delivered in the same way that a road project might be delivered. It's going to take a long time to change the culture and the way of working within the council. But I think some of that is already happening. I think that it's very clear that the whole of this programme won't be within COSMIC, and I think the paper that comes back in September probably needs to be focusing on the elements of decentralisation that are the COSMIC elements, and actually the way in which COSMIC is already doing this. And I think that the paper that we've just been discussing, talking about the way in which we're delivering the Household Support Fund, is potentially one of the ways in which we are already working and looking to work in a more decentralised way. It isn't kind of explicitly written into that paper, but the fact that that's being delivered with partners in a kind of locally sensitive way is part of that process. So I think we will, you will have a paper back in September with some COSMIC focused ideas, and I think because it's a programme that started in this committee, it would be reasonable for this committee to have a view over what is going on in the rest of the council, because there will be a whole lot of other decentralisation projects that don't sit within COSMIC, but it might be nice for you to know what those are in September, or what those are going to be and how they're being worked on. But I imagine that going forward, you will be focused on your COSMIC bits of that programme, and that gradually those will stop being decentralisation papers. They'll just be papers about the things that you're doing anyway, which are delivered in a different way. So I think the way in which this is reported will probably change, but that doesn't mean that the programme is not happening. I hope that's a helpful illustration of the way in which we're moving things.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Yeah, Claire.
Probably just going back over what other people have said, but I noticed here under 2.2.6, the intention to provide a navigator and reference point for all local public services. And I think that's something, an area where I think communities can really add value, not duplicating what district council development officers are doing and doing well, but acting as a point of reference, and a point of reference for all services provided by the county council. And I think probably that's something that could be developed more and could actually be a very defined Think Communities role across the county, so that they were the people who knew what county council services were, how members of the public could access them, where they intersected with district council services, where they were different from district council services. And really be a fount of knowledge across the county.
Thank you, Councillor. Indeed, as Councillor Nestinger said, I think a lot of these services and approaches are in place, and that is very much the way that the Think Community Service is supposed to operate. They need to understand their place, and it's that I'm delighted to say it's at the level of organisation and with district councils, because what they can't do in that space is be a source of information for individuals, because that's not the way they're set up.
If I could just come back on that, I think that just needs to be clearer in my experience, in my own division and neighbouring divisions. It just needs to be clearer that they are the point of reference and that they are knowledgeable about services in the local area.
Thank you very much, Claire. Anybody else wish to contribute? Ian, go.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as a member of a very rural area, I would like to see how the this programme will lead to the decentralisation of Cambridgeshire County Council services in a very rural area. I represent over 25 parish councils. Now, it will be, I need to see how, and I have not yet seen how that will affect my parishes across my division. So I would be interested to see how a pilot would work in a very rural area. It's not like in the towns where you've got communities and you have, community centres and everything else. A rural area, it is very spread out, and people are individuals in villages and what have you. You haven't got the large groups of people. How are we going to decentralize across those rural areas? And that is what I will be extremely interested to see, how this administration is looking to do that, and how they are then going to work with the county councillor for that area, whether it be myself or Henry in Linton. We need to know how you're going to work with the county councillors in this decentralisation programme. As of yet, I haven't seen anything to show me how that is going to work. So I will be very interested in September to see how that is going to be achieved.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else before I move the recommendations? So recommendations are at A to D. I'm not going to read them out. If I've read the room correctly, and I may not have done, there seems to be a consensus in support of the recommendations. Does anybody have any disagreements at all? No. Okay, so I see no objections. So we'll take the recommendations as carried unanimously. Thank you for your input into that, that item. Item 7 is the Communities Capital Fund. Over to you again, Paul.
Apologies, members, me again. You'll get a break from my Black Country drone soon, I promise you. So this paper talks to and updates the committee on the progress of the Communities Capital Fund and sets out some organisational governance processes regarding funds that have yet to complete, have stalled and are red rated, and a reallocation process for money that may become available to the fund in the near future. So the background to the paper talks about in April 2020, previous committee agreed £5 million of a capital fund up to £500,000 per project maximum. And the paper describes the purpose and the process by which that funding was allocated, and that 35 projects were funded during that process over a period of about 4 to 5 months over a set of different committee meetings. The purpose of the paper, as I say, is to update on the delivery of those projects, also to recommend to committee a governance structure and process to deal with those projects that are incomplete, and also proposes what to do with monies now available and may become available due to projects that have not completed and have been terminated, or projects that may not move to completion. It's not the purpose, as it says at 1.7 of this paper, to discuss individual projects. This is fundamentally a governance paper. The governance section does set out that Think Communities Service have been stewarding these programs since April 2021. And we now have a robust project management system that tells us that of the 35 projects, 26 have completed. 1 has been confirmed by the applicant as unable to proceed and money has been returned. Actually, I need to be careful with my phraseology. We talk about money being returned to the pot. That money was, of course, never paid. So that money is now available. And 8 projects are red rated. They have stalled. And those red rated projects in total are worth 2.4 million. But because milestones have not been hit, some monies have been paid when they hit initial milestones, but overall that accounts for £1.7 million that we still have available as allocated to those projects, but hasn't been paid to those projects. Section 4 sets out a review of the governance process to deal with those red rated projects, the projects that have stalled and not hit milestones. It recommends a member-led steering group, the terms of reference of which are set out in Appendix 1. That steering group, it is recommended, will make recommendations to be determined by this committee. that those 8 projects will be reviewed not en bloc, but on an individual basis, with the assessment criteria for those projects set out in section 4.3, and that this process be in line with the grants to external organisations policy that is set out in Appendix 2 to this report. It's suggested that those reviews undertaken by the steering group will have 4 potential outcomes: a recommendation to terminate the project, a recommendation to extend the project timeline, because these projects are now not meeting their grant agreements, but where there are significant issues, perhaps, for example, not exclusively, but for example, due to COVID, the subgroup might recommend an extension where there are no other amendments to the agreement other than time. The third outcome might be to amend the proposal, but that would be where that amendment would be cost neutral or require less than the original allocation. And the reason that I specify those 2 is that if an amendment requires extra resources, that has to be a new application. So the 4th outcome would be an invitation for new application. And that is set out in section 9.5 of our grants to external organisations policy, which clearly states increase in allocations to grant funds should be treated as new applications. Section 5 sets out the finances, £274,000 definitely available based on the return money from the terminated project, and a small element, 40,000, that was never allocated. And then technically up to 1.71 million additionally available, depending on the fate of those red rated projects and which of those outcomes I've just set out comes from their review. Section 6 talks about the reallocation of the available funds. Of course, we don't know the quantum yet until those reviews have been undertaken. But again, it sets out that that allocation should be in line with the grants to external organisations policy, that it should clearly support the policies of the strategic framework of the council, and hence the new name for the next round as set out in 6.4 to show that the new allocations will be clearly aligned with those priorities. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Who would like to go first? Steve and then Jan.
Thank you, Chairman. Really pleased to see that 26 projects have been completed quickly and effectively, especially considering this scheme was launched just before COVID, and obviously a huge number of problems caused as a result. So really not surprised that some of the larger projects have struggled. Fully support the forming of a steering group to look at these individually. But I must try and extract an exception or a difference with the Kimbolton project, if I may, Chair. The other 7 projects obviously involve partner organisations. There's complications. They need to be looked at in detail. No problem with that whatsoever. However, with particular representation from Councillor Gardner, who's the local member, Kimbolton Parish Council and community really feel they're being put out to dry here, if you will, Chairman. We have very recently circulated an amendment I'd like to make, but I'm going to read it, Chairman, because not everybody will have had time to digest it. And I suppose the point we're making is the agreed purpose of the Community Capital Fund was to enable completion of valuable existing community projects that were stalling due to a shortfall in reaching the final cost. Bids are assessed by officers and considered in depth by a cross-party working group before final endorsement by the previous committee. This committee's inherited the budget and responsibility for this fund. The proposed raised pedestrian crossing in Kimbolton is one such scheme, and the joint funding by the parish council and the district council left a shortfall estimated by County Highways to be £23,591. Kimbolton Parish Council therefore applied to the Communities Capital Fund for the above quoted shortfall and was successful. This allowed the project to be scheduled for completion this summer. Prior to commencing construction, County Highways has now informed the applicant the cost has increased by an estimated £10,718.76 and cannot now be delivered as proposed without a further injection of funds. Unlike the other 7 red-rated projects in this report, the funding shortfall is an internal matter for this council. The Capital Fund agreed to award the shortfall and County Highways quoted the required amount. To not resolve this issue internally and expect others to raise the funds would reflect badly on this council, and I have to say it's already doing so. Outwardly, we appear to be doing nothing to resolve this. Construction of the crossing is planned to take place very shortly during the school holidays. Waiting for consideration by the proposed steering group, followed by endorsement by committee, would require unplanned borrowing, cause undue delay, and may result in additional costs. This committee has the decision-making power to cover the shortfall from the funds available. This would allow the project to proceed in a timely manner without further embarrassment to this council. The remaining 7 projects can then be reviewed by the steering group as proposed. The policy makes clear, Chairman, that we shouldn't be funding outside bodies or the overspend by the recipient without having a separate bidding process. However, this isn't an overspend by the recipient, it's an overspend by County Highways. And we're not funding an outside body, we're funding County Highways. This is trying to prevent a problem by us taking responsibility as a council. We're responsible for the shortfall. This fund could make that shortfall up. And County Highways are prepared to continue with the project, provided they're guaranteed that they will receive that extra funding at some point. Now, somehow we need to provide that guarantee, Chairman. So I do see this as an urgent exception to the policy, and my amendment that I'm proposing would be to recognise that. So my amendment I'm suggesting, Chairman, is to introduce a new item E, a new recommendation E, and to say that as a clearly reasoned exception, award £10,718.76 to Cambridgeshire Highways from the Communities Capital Fund to cover the estimated funding shortfall of the Kimbolton pedestrian crossing project. The existing recommendation E would then become recommendation F. So that's the recommendation I'd like to move, Chairman. I understand all the points that are being made in the paper, but I really do feel this is an exception because it's the county council that's the cause of this, and it's the county council that can solve it. I hope this committee would recognise that. It doesn't involve any outside bodies or underspends by anybody else, and it's nobody else's fault. So, as I said, it doesn't set a precedent for the other 7 schemes because they are entirely different. So, and I believe I have a seconder in Councillor Costello, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Steve, for moving that amendment. Adela has seconded. So we'll now discuss the amendment. Who would like to start? I have a feeling Councillor Gardner might want to, but do you have to declare? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, first of all, I need to declare an interest as the member for Alconbury and Kimbolton division, and therefore, as a consequence, as in the previous rounds when the funds were allocated, the local member was not able to vote. So I will not vote on this particular item because I don't think it's fair to do so. What I would say is that the Kimbolton Parish Council and everybody else put in for the scheme to the original Communities Capital Fund, and we were successful after gaining monies from the district council, equal amount, and from the parish council. Now, in order to, we were then, so that was all going along fine for the raised pedestrian crossing. However, due to problems with regard to getting a final quotation through Milestone, that, as Councillor has already stated, has now, the quote for that has now gone up considerably. In order to pay for it, the county council has said, well, they've agreed with the parish council, because the parish council have agreed to pay the additional £10,700, which for a parish council is a lot of money. The only way the parish council can do that is by putting that onto their precept next year. That would then have to be, that's how it will be funded if we can't get agreement from this committee to fund the deficit, because the parish council are determined to get this pedestrian crossing built, because it is something they've been looking for many a year, to provide a safe crossing across the B645 for the disabled, elderly, young children going to school, the elderly going to community centres and what have you, going to the local shop, the bus stop and everything else. So, you know, it is a vital piece of local infrastructure that is required in Kimbolton. And I would sincerely hope that this committee could find the will to provide parish council with this additional funding, 10,700, so that they don't have to find it next year out of their precept. If you can't, then I would certainly ask that the parish council are given the opportunity to apply for the funding through the scheme that's already been announced by Mr. Fox.
Thanks, Ian. My understanding is that Kimbolton Parish Council were advised that they could amend the scheme so it would stay within budget. Do you know why they declined to take that opportunity? And and the parish council are the applicants here, aren't they? Yeah.
Parish council, they applied and they were successful in getting a raised table crossing, which the parish council felt was better for allowing disabled access and what have you across the B645. It would also slow traffic coming into Kimbolton. Therefore, that is the scheme that they applied for. That is the scheme that they wanted. Yes, the county council said they could have a standard crossing and they would pay the shortfall, which is what the county council has done, which is approximately £2,600. But the parish council are arguing that they applied for the table pedestrian crossing under the scheme. And that is what they were successful for, and that is what they and the residents of Kimbolton want. So, you know, that's.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Bryony, Ros, and then Henry.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I'm all for safe pedestrian crossings as someone who has responsibility for safeguarding of children and others in the community. It's a very important project. I don't think the Highways Committee, however, can be blamed for the increase in costs, which I think is probably more down to energy crisis and Brexit and others. My worry with the amendment, as it's put, is the difficulty it brings onto recommendation C, which we have in the paper, which is the agreement of the draft terms of reference for the capital steering group, particularly term of reference 4.6, which says variation requests cannot include requests for increased grant allocation, and the council's grants to external organisations policy, as attached to Appendix 2, is clear such requests must be considered as new applications. My worry with this is that we're creating an exception here, and an exception for one project out of 8 would get us into difficulties going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryony. I'll come back to you at the end, Ian. Is that okay? If you've got the right to reply. No worries. Of course we do. Ros, you're next.
Yes, I agree with what Councillor Goodliffe just said. You know, I mean, I think it's the type of project which I'm quite sure the steering group would be very receptive to. I think we all support this type of project in principle, but this amendment has very little detail. All we've got is we've got one side of the story. We need to see what happened about the correspondence, and we need to hear Highways side of the events. There is sufficient funding for you know, for additional funds to be allocated, but there is a process being set up in this paper, which making sure that this happens in a fair and reasonable, well scrutinised manner. So to support this amendment today, just exactly to sort of invalidates the whole motion, the whole paper, really.
Thank you, Henry, and then Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I do have every single sympathy with the people of Kimbolton. I appreciate costs do rise, and that's something that is can be outside of various bodies' control. The one thing I am uncomfortable with is being sort of presented this amendment sort of some 10 minutes before the meeting begins. So therefore, I don't really have any time to, see the justification. I appreciate Councillor Criswell has given a very detailed explanation as why the extra money is needed. But I mean, I'm a bit uncomfortable in essentially approving a grant of over £10,500 on the hoof, as it were, just based on a verbal explanation. So, I mean, I would encourage obviously officers, if there's any way we could facilitate this, providing it meets all the governance arrangements as swiftly as possible, because one thing I wouldn't want to see is that the project either falls by the wayside or isn't able to being able to take forward because of funding. But as I say, as a committee member's point of view, I am uncomfortable approving a significantly large amount of money to be funded to a project without any proper written justification. So that's where I sit, Chair.
Thank you, Henry. Lucy.
Thank you. I first of all want to say that I absolutely understand the really serious concerns that there are, that this is already in the programme for this year, and if it's scheduled for this summer, that a decision about whether it can go ahead this summer is really urgent. And I also agree with Bryony and Ros and Henry that actually I'm not sure that making that decision in this committee without the right kind of background information is the right thing to do. What I am happy to do is to try and take an action as leader to look into this really quickly and try and make sure that we can make sure that this doesn't get delayed by either having to go through the steering group or by other reasons. It's not, in the context of officer delegations in this council, it's not an unfeasible amount of money. But we do need to make sure that we go through the right processes, and it's possible that it shouldn't come out of this fund. It's also possible that it can, and that we can get the steering group to make that decision in time to agree it. So I don't think it's the right thing to sign it off before the steering group have had a look at it, because that's their job. But I do absolutely understand the need for an urgent decision on this one. And I also completely take Councillor Criswell's kind of initial point that the situation with this project is a bit different from some of the others on that list, in that this is a project that is, or some of the projects that are on the list are quite far down and quite close to completion, and others are for very large amounts of money and have hardly started. And I think there probably does need to be a distinction in how those two groups of projects on the red list are looked at. I'm sure the steering group are perfectly capable of deciding that, and the quicker we can get the steering group set up, the quicker that they can make recommendations. So I hope that's helpful.
If I can be helpful based on that previous comment, as I understand the grants to external organisations policy, for additional applications which must be treated as new applications, there doesn't have to be necessarily a competitive process that we would clearly all, I'm sure, want to see if we were opening out applications to new grants when greater amount of money. So I can certainly have a look in the spirit of that to see if we can get an earlier meeting. I think initially we were thinking about September, but I wonder if an earlier meeting of the steering group might be possible that had two agenda items, one to agree the terms of reference and one to review this project, which would allow us to keep in line with the governance processes that we set out, because I believe that is important. But would also bring an earlier determination on this particular project.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Chairman. So I welcome the response from Lucy, the leader, and from Paul. That's helpful, thank you. Just to reassure Councillor Batchelor that the amendment was submitted 2 days ago as is required, so it wasn't just tabled today. So that has been around for 2 days. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, I think Fiona was checking, wasn't she, on whether it was acceptable, which she deemed it was. So you were, yeah, you're in certainly in time for this. Anybody else? Ian.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I also would like to thank Councillor Nessinger for her comments, which I think were very, very useful, and Paul Fox. They are extremely useful. Just to say, the project is proceeding because the parish council has said they will find the £10,700 that is short by putting up their precept next year if the county council cannot find that additional money. So the project will proceed, but I just think because it was already agreed to put in that particular raised pedestrian crossing, you know, the county council should not now fall back on what it said originally agreed with the parish and the district council, that it would provide that crossing in that location. So I welcome the fact that we're going to now look at that further, and I would hope as the local member that that additional monies will be found by the county council. But I will not vote, as already said, on this because I've got a vested interest.
Thank you, Ian. Adela.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Steve that this is no one's fault. It's not the fault of the highways. They quoted a price 2 years ago, and we know from different local highway initiatives that the cost is going up for many of our towns who applied for grants for improvements. But I think it is down to us to make sure that something that we agreed to, even if the cost has increased, should go through. And, you know, and I think, you know, the suggestions that have been made that we speed up the meetings, you know, that will help. Thank you.
Thank you, Adela. Anybody else before Ros? Yeah.
So I think in this instance, and that's a principle that, you know, looking at inflation, whatever, is relevant, but I'm not sure the principle applies for all the projects, that just because costs, we need to look, this is the point of the steering group, that we need to look into it and whether it, you know, whether the delays are reasonable. It's really complicated. I recognize that, but that's the point of setting this group up.
Agree entirely, Ros. So if there are no other comments, we'll go to the vote. Amendment proposed by Steve, seconded by Ian. All those in favour? Sorry, Adela. Sorry, Adela seconded it, yeah. All those in favour? Thank you very much. All those against? Okay, so the amendment is lost. So we'll now go back to the substantive motion. As per the recommendations at A to E. Any comments from anyone? Yeah.
Sorry, are we now going back to the original discussion? Thank you. Yes, when we first started this, I think it was 2020, pre-COVID, this was very exciting program for the whole of the county. And it is nice to see that 26 out of 35 projects have actually been completed. And obviously, you know, the small villages, they didn't get a lot of money, but that money was very vital to what they wanted. I'm deeply disappointed that you've got it down there as March Sports Association. It's actually the rugby club that were allocated this money. And it's deeply disappointing that didn't proceed. But what concerns me more than anything else, on table 1, you said that there's 8 projects are considered red rated. I don't know about the other ones, but certainly the Wisbech Park Pavilion, my understanding is that is nearly complete. And I do note that they haven't had any payments whatsoever. And I thought in amongst that, there was a splash park involved. I do know that it's excessively over budget. Where they're going to get the money to complete it, I don't know. But can we have confirmation how much you think it's actually red rated? Because my understanding, I know that the marketplace in Wisbech was finished 2 weeks ago, which looks absolutely superb. But I'm not sure about the pavilion. I thought that was completed. I know that the splash park has been installed, but due to connections, UK Power, etc., they can't actually have the water working until later on in the year. So they're in there. So I don't know how much of an update you've had recently, but I would be interested to find out. And am I correct that with the over budget, that they can actually apply for a new application to a system?
So I think on this, we probably need to put that as part of the work for the steering group. I think
Okay,
if yeah, no, but I would totally know your points, Jan. I think if we get bogged down in our own specific projects, we could be here for a long time.
No, that's fine.
Certainly something we need to consider as part of that work, but thanks for bringing it to our attention. Anybody else? Philippa.
Yes, I was able to go yesterday to the online LGA training on social value. Now, I freely admit I'm new to that idea, and in the terms that it is now happening, and I'm unaware, I'm afraid, through ignorance of just how much this council follows those lines or uses those techniques and monitoring. I was much impressed by the usefulness of having such carefully worked out techniques to achieve aims, and particularly for the other organisations than the councils, either in the private sector or in this case, possibly by people applying for funding for grant applications. Now, I realise that the main thrust of the social value is to make good use of public funds when we're commissioning services and projects. But in 6.7, we do see the forward look after the steering group. And I would like to have something in there about social value. What are the themes that this council uses? And are there ways in which this would help other bodies, often enthusiastic residents plus parish councils or sports bodies, to do their project business planning and in a more trained way, because there appears to be a lot of help available from the social value forum. So I just would, and that would also perhaps alert some people outside this room who, like me, were not aware of this, the social value forum. Thank you.
Thank you. So just for information, certainly the council as a whole is moving towards greater assessment of social value in its assessment of proposals and services. And I know that the business case cycle for the coming year budgeting will be based on what's broadly known as triple bottom line accounting, which will take social value and environmental value into account as well as financial. I need to refresh myself on the Innovate and Cultivate Fund, as was Cultivate Cambs as is, but that's moving increasingly towards social value. And of course, a number of the projects one might envisage within a community's capital fund replacement, the priorities fund, their entire raison d'etre would be social value rather than, yes, absolutely, the principles need to be brought in. How exactly this is done for assessment of the fund, we will work through as part of the steering group.
Thank you. Hilary, you're next.
Oh, thank you. Paul really summed up what I was going to say then, actually. So thank you. No, that's great. I was just going to say that about the triple bottom line around socioeconomic and environmental value, and also the donut economic model that we've been looking at across county, or the, like the 9 principles of the Bennett Institute, or we talked to Cornwall County Council, Cornwall Council as well, to look at their strategies that they were using to measure, which is a Conservative council that have been using it as well. So I think this is very much a cross-party way of looking at how we evaluate. And I think, I think that's an exciting cultural change too.
Thank you. Anybody else at all? Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Just to mention, I seem to recall that social and community impact were some of the judging criteria, if you like, for the capital fund when it was rolled out. So that would have been taken into account, and is very valuable too. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, without question, some excellent projects have received funding here, and some have obviously not progressed. And it may be through no fault of their own, maybe very good reasons for that, maybe some not such good reasons. But I think we'll dig into that further when we have the first meeting of this steering group. I think before we go to the recommendations, it might be useful just to get an indication of who'd like to be on that. I'd certainly be interested. I know Hilary would, Ros and Henry from a joint administration. From your group, Steve? Yeah, no problem, that's fine. Okay, so there seems to be a consensus in support of these recommendations. If anybody disagrees, do you want to indicate? No, everyone seems happy. So I see no objections, so we'll take the recommendations as carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Paul. And you'll be glad to know you can have a rest now.
You'll be glad to know.
No, that's fine. So item 8 is Cambridgeshire Skills 6-month review. I'd like to welcome the Assistant Director of Skills, Employment and Libraries, Pat Carrington, and the new Head of Cambridgeshire Skills, Tom Malloy, who's joining us today to present the 6-month review. Tom and Pat, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to come and share with you the progress of Cambridgeshire Skills. Just to recap for some of the members who possibly weren't on this committee at that time, Cambridgeshire Skills was developed as a new delivery model for adult education in Cambridgeshire Skills, ready for the devolution of the adult education budget that used to come for the Department of Education, but with devolution migrated to the combined authority. So when we originally set up Cambridgeshire Skills, it was agreed that the chair of this committee would be the chair of governors for Cambridgeshire Skills. So that started with Councillor Criswell as our initial and original chair of Cambridgeshire Skills, and Tom now sits as our current chair of governors. And as Tom said, Tom is our new head of service after Tanya, who was the original head of service, left us recently, and Tom joined us on the 6th of June. So one of his first tasks was to develop this report for the committee. But I'm going to hand over to Tom to actually deliver the report to yourself.
Good morning, everyone. So as Pat said, I did this report in my first week, so I think the next report will probably be more detailed and have greater insight. But I think what I can certainly do at this point is say that Cambridgeshire Skills is in a good place.
Sorry, Tom, can I just ask you just to speak just a bit closer to the microphone?
Sorry, is that better?
Fine. That's
Yes.
great, thank you. You're so far away, aren't you? You guys, you're just...
Okay, so I think the first thing to say is that we need to remember that Cambridgeshire Skills is externally funded. So we get predominantly the large amount of our money comes from the combined authority, with another small pot from the Education and Skills Funding Agency. So that funding we use to deliver adult education across the county. And over the last year, we've had a number of challenges, but also a number of successes. And the main one being that in March, Cambridgeshire Skills was inspected for the first time in 6 years by Ofsted. That inspection deemed that the service to remain good. And that was a even better achievement, considering it was on the end of the restrictions that had been placed because of COVID. And as Pat was just describing, the service had been completely overhauled and redesigned to meet the needs and requirements set by the combined authority and the funding regulations that we work within. Within that, Ofsted identified a number of key strengths. Learners gain significant benefit from their courses. They gain their skills they need to meet regional and national skills demand. Leaders and managers to continue to implement effective curriculum that meets the needs of different communities they serve county-wide. And learners are highly motivated to succeed. So I think there was more than that, and the report was very positive. And as I said, coming out, having the inspection when it was, I think was, incredibly, well done to everyone in the team and the service, learners and partners for achieving that result. Over the last year, this last academic year, and the service has recruited over 3,200 learners there. That number's increased from what's in the report because I updated that yesterday. And they're coming in a range of different areas. Predominantly, we're looking at things around English, maths, supporting people into work, and a number of community type provision across the county. Learners are achieving at a higher rate than they are nationally, and our success rates are looking strong. We work with a number of key partners, both internally and externally, that help us deliver the service and achieve the outcomes. And when we do that, we also do that through subcontracting and working directly with partners such as, the traveller health team, early years team, etc. We also, operate on a sort of a hub and spoke model. Our main venue being March, which over the last year has undergone some significant investment to improve and bring that site, up to standard. We also work out of Ely Library and Cambridge Library. And again, within Cambridge Library, we're working closely with the library service about the redevelopment of the third floor there to make that into a learning centre, which kind of really meets the needs of the 21st century. One of the other key developments over the last year has been working with a number of large employers and helping them develop new workers. One of those is DHL, where we're providing a large ESOL provision, that's English for speakers of the languages. So they're able to recruit workers who predominantly in the past they wouldn't, because their standard of English wasn't up to standard. But we are now providing courses when they recruit these workers, so we can help them get the English levels that they require to do their jobs effectively. There's some new opportunities. There's a new stream of funding coming through the combined authority through the DFE called Multiply, which will be predominantly, well, not predominantly, it's solely focused on improving people's math skills. I think this is a new opportunity for the next 12 months. It's a 3-year program, but again, that will be starting soon. We've started job clubs, which we run out of Ely Library in Huntingdon and within March Community Centre, and they're proving effective in helping people move into work. One of the things where we do need to do a little piece of work is there is a misconception, and this isn't just a local misconception with Cambridge Skills, I think it's a national thing about the cost of adult learning. The vast majority of adult learning is free. Any English, maths, ESOL, IT learning is free to the learner. And any individual who earns less, and it's individual, it's not household income, is learning less than £21,000, their learning is free. So again, I think we need to do a bit of work about the promotions of that. But we do work closely with corporate colleagues in communications, and we're working on a communication plans to go out at the start of the academic year to promote that. But I think there's still more we can be doing. But I think overall, the service as well, it's meeting, corporate and national policies and initiatives. And I think moving forward, as we come out and truly come out of COVID and look at the cost of living crisis, we've got a new program designed for September, which is more focused on meeting some of those needs. But as I said, it's about building on the successes that are there. And as I get to know the service better and I can identify areas for improvement, we'll make those improvements. But fundamentally, it's a good service, and I want to, I think that's me for now.
Thank you very much, both. Any questions at all? Bryony, then Philippa.
Thank you, Chair. And if I can congratulate you first on your Ofsted, I know what a mission it is to get through that, and you've done very well, obviously, with the outcome. I appreciate what you said about working with large employers, and obviously it's very key and a great way to reach large numbers of participants. Can I also ask, with an eye towards decentralisation and that kind of work, how you already, or how you aim to get into small and medium-sized businesses who I know are having huge issues at the moment, and it'd be really interesting to know your plans going forward. Thank you.
The key thing for that is working with things like the Chamber and other employee groups. We're working with the library, and I always forget what the new thing is, the business, BACP, to promoting our services with them and supporting them. So again, it'd be those sorts of avenues we'd look to use. Yeah, and the Federation of Small Businesses as well.
Thank you, Philippa, Hilary, and then Claire, and then Lucy.
Yes, thank you for your report and welcome to the County Council. In fact, I was thinking of things and you picked on most of them in the report already, but just to say them, because many of us are members of committees or just in our own divisions are well aware of the tremendous problems the health service has in recruiting and retaining. Good to see you're working with the larger organisations. It's really all so that you know what they are looking for and how we can upskill the people that come our way, or maybe are now available for a different sort of work, maybe making changes in their lives, as a lot of people are. Looking at the booklet, the live on-stream courses are clearly key to getting some of our residents some of the benefits of Cambridgeshire Skills. Councillor Gardner said earlier about the villages. How do we get the learning to the, how can people learn in isolated areas? If they don't have their own devices or a secure contact, then clearly live stream is fraught with difficulty, even if they're adept to that sort of learning. This is obviously not something that Cambridgeshire Skills can do on its own, but partnership with parish councils and even using venues that are available through the churches and the parish councils, the village halls. There are many really good venues, and we're aware that some of them are underused. And those sort of partnerships, rather like the partnerships with the smaller businesses, I think is something that perhaps you will find there are obviously ways of doing that even within our county council, because we're trying to deliver health services or library services and all sorts of things in the same way. But the live stream courses particularly caught my eye on needing that help. That was my main thing, and glad to, yes, we do need to correct the misconception about funding. We obviously need some people to be paying fees, but we don't need that. We mustn't have that as a barrier. So then anything that you can be sending out that we can help move along to where people need it, the better. Thank you.
Do you want to respond, or are you happy with it?
No, I'm happy with that. I think the only thing about online, I would just like to add that we do have a scheme within Cambridgeshire Skills that provides on a sort of and that we lend hardware and dongles. So hardware is like laptops that people can borrow, and if they don't have Wi-Fi data, they can also borrow data. Also within our funding, we do have a learner support fund element where people can apply, and one of the things that they can apply for a variety of things, help with travel, childcare, etc. But it can also cover the cost of device or for data Wi-Fi costs as well.
Thank you. I've got Hilary next, then Claire, then Lucy.
Thank you. Thank you for that update. Fantastic. I just wanted to ask about the possible support or the commitment that we could make to Region of Learning and the data research platform that they're putting together, which I believe they're due to launch on the 27th of July. And this is an app that would, it's data that can be shared across the county council, and it's across the county, it's county data, and it's pulling in from social care data, free school meals, library, social economic data, and it would be through the library card is my understanding of it. And I think it's been developed for the last sort of 6 years. It's been an ongoing project that to work in partnership. So I know that they've been, this would, you know, I know that they've been trying to make these links, and it looks to me like it could really help support our understanding of what works for social mobility and where it's missing, and that's the research that they are looking at doing. Do you have any update on that at all, please?
I don't, so I'm going to refer to Pat on that one.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been involved with Regions of Learning for 2 or 3 years now, both being responsible in county for skills and also libraries. And so absolutely, we intend to play a role within that. One of our challenges in the initial early stages is it's aimed at young people, and our funding is for adults, which is 19 plus. I think the nice thing about Regions of Learning is that because of where the funding potential is going to come from, we're not going to be restricted with a defined age group of what a young person is. So I think that we can definitely play a role, both in terms of the young people that access the skills that we provide, so those sort of 19 to 30-year-olds, but also parents in terms of promoting it as well. So, you know, we would welcome any opportunity to play an active role within that.
Thank you so much. And you will have an expertise that I have, you know, an insight that I have no idea about. So I really am just, you know, just pulling on that. I think that they, am I right that they launched their programme directed to employers recently?
To be honest with you, I'm not fully aware of that minute detail on the rollout. I do know that there's a proposal within the Shared Prosperity Fund when that hits the skills arena to have that as one of the proposed projects in terms of the Regions of Learning. And I believe that the Skills Committee in the Combined Authority on the 4th of July, in the paper that was produced to that committee, there is a recommendation or proposal that Regions of Learning is able to be one of the projects that's funded. I think sort of the challenges with that is the skills part of the Shared Prosperity Fund is in year 3. But at least that gives an opportunity to build on these pilots that have taken place in the rollout further. So I know it's very high on the agenda of of the Combined Authority, the Shared Prosperity Fund and the Skills Committee, which I believe, Lucy, you chair, is driving this through as well. So I think it's an exciting project, and being involved in those early stages will allow us sort of to test and then develop it further, ready for when the Shared Prosperity Fund opportunity comes forward.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and then Lucy.
Thank you. I just want to draw attention to the improving digital inclusion. One of the things that that came to the fore during COVID was the digital exclusion of many older people. And I wonder if you've been able to do anything to improve that, to offer training, offer help on digital inclusion, specifically for older people.
If I may, I'll take the first part of the question, which covers before Tom's time, and then be able to pass to Tom to talk about future plans. So during COVID, when we had lockdown take place and a lot of vulnerable people were very isolated and didn't have access, we launched in partnership with libraries, Cambridgeshire Skills, something called Open Door, which was a specific door into opportunities to learn, but not just learning in the academic sense, but learning for leisure and pleasure. And so there were links to different opportunities there. So that sat alongside the COVID Recovery Hub, in which people could access that and also get access to the devices that Tom was talking about. Wellbeing is a significant part of what the adult education budget is designed to deliver. So I'm going to pass over to Tom now, who can talk about the plans to using that moving forward, if I may.
Yes, so from September, we have a programme which is including a number of courses and interventions that will help to address the concerns raised. I think one of the things that will be key for this is working with our partners and new partners, also looking to use where we subcontract is to subcontract targets in working with those organisations that are specifically already working with those groups that have been identified, so we can alleviate the issues of digital exclusion and etc. So that's the plans. What we can do is share in detail with committee if required what those plans are for September.
I'm guessing, but I think possibly one of the challenges you might have is getting to the people who need the help. Because obviously nowadays we're so used to finding things online, and these are precisely the people who can't find the things online that they need to know.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you've been able to think through a sort of access plan for reaching these people.
Yes, I think as I said, I've been here not so long, but it's about working with those key partners. I think, again, it's about partnerships. Cambridgeshire Skills, we're across the county, but it's looking with internal partners and those externals, Age Concern, etc., looking with all of those, so we can, hope that people can be signposted to us, referred to us, and actually we can then approach those who may be not aware of us, and actually then say, actually, we can actually help with the skills that you may be lacking.
I think what would be really helpful is if you have any contact, what would be really helpful is if any of the councillors have any contacts with organisations that they think it would be helpful for us to have conversations with, then we'd welcome those names and contact details, because you have a whole network of organisations that locally that we may not be aware of, so we'd welcome any thoughts or ideas on who we could talk to and partner with.
Thank you very much all. Lucy, you're next.
Thank you very much. Very nice to see this coming here. It is somewhat familiar, as has been said. I chair the CPCA Skills Committee, so we see some of this data coming there, but it's really important that it comes here as well. And I add my congratulations on the Ofsted rating, which is really important. I can't emphasize enough how crucial this work is for us all at the moment, because there has never in my lifetime been a time when it is so important that people who would be able to help and work and contribute in our economy are able to do so, not just for them, because actually we have a massive cost of living crisis, and enabling people to access work will be increasingly important for their own personal well-being, but also from the point of view of our country and our economy, because I have never been aware of a time when the labour market was as tight as it is now, and when it was so difficult to recruit people. So making sure that we are providing the right training to people in our county to enable them to access those jobs is just crucially important. It's also really one of the comparatively few really good news stories from our devolution arrangements, that the skills work has been so successful, and it really is going very well, and it's great to see the multiply money coming in here, and lots of other exciting new projects that the skills team at the Combined Authority are taking forward, so that's brilliant. Sorry, I'm not going to spend too long talking about all the good things, because I do also have some questions. One of those is that looking at your hub and spokes model, there is a glaring gap in the west of the county, and I just wondered whether you were looking at that. That there is also a fairly glaring gap in further education provision in St Neots in particular anyway, so I don't know whether you're kind of working on that at the moment, because it does seem to be quite east based at the moment. So, and I understand why that would be the case, but I'm also aware from things that I was being told yesterday that actually employment rates and business growth in Huntingdonshire is not going as rapidly as we might all want it to, and it's very important that we don't neglect that part of the county. And the second thing I wanted to say was that I was just wondering how you monitor people's progress into work, because it must be very difficult to do that, given all the work in the gig economy and all the different ways in which people can work. Are you able to map the success of your programs in helping people to move forward and progress into work?
Okay, thank you. The first thing about the West, you're right. Again, one of the things that when I began looking at the data and where our learners were and our provision, St Neots certainly was a cold spot that I've sort of identified, and that's something I'm looking at, as I said. Huntingdonshire, in Huntingdon, we do have a reasonable amount of provision in community venues and the library. In terms of tracking sort of outcomes, we do track our learners. It is not an exact science, because again we are reliant on those individuals to respond, but we do have, it's reasonably robust, I think is how I would describe it, but we certainly do have that data.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Ros?
So I did send over an email of a list of the questions I wanted to ask. And sorry if this is a bit list-like. So the report is very positive, but it's very easy to submit a positive report. And Lucy's comments were extremely reassuring that having sort of being more familiar with this service and sort of seeing it globally, it is doing really well. But of the overall enrolment, what I was interested in knowing was how was that split across the county by district, and what are the age profiles? And then there's a whole lot of other questions, but is that a good place to start?
Yes, okay, so thank you for that question, and thank you for sending them through, because I've brought the answers with me. So in terms of the district split, the largest amount of provision is in Cambridge itself at 24%, followed by South Cambs at 20%. Fenland has 18%, Huntingdonshire 12%, and then East Cambs at 8%. We do have then 12% from out of county. In terms of the age split, where's that gone? So 18% is under 30, 28% are in the 30s, 28% in their 40s, and then 15% in their 50s, and over 70s, we've got 5% in total. I'll give a detailed breakdown because I've actually split into 5-year chunks, a lot of them. So again, it's
that's really helpful, and personally, I'd love to see that in the reports in future because I think it's really helpful.
No,
so I don't see many adverts for Cambridgeshire Skills, but I suspect I might not be the target audience. How do you reach people?
Okay, we use a number of mediums. We've used social media. We have our so we've got our own channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and possibly more. We use the corporate communication channels as well. So we promote stories through there. And with the brochure coming out, we're using some case studies to promote that. We work with, partners. Again, a lot of it is about getting, with the targeted services, working with those specific groups. So again, job centre, libraries, etc. We also work with employers. So again, it's working with those. But we used, we've had targeted leaflet drops. So again, where we've been doing things in particular areas, and then using like small adverts in particular community locations, community centres, supermarkets, etc. But we use a whole host of things depending on what it is we're promoting.
Do we have an idea of the sort of people who we really want to reach, what sort of percentage we are reaching, or is that data that is impossible to put together?
It's not impossible to put together, but I don't have that to hand. I can get that information and provide that.
And what do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of the current approach?
I think the strengths of the current approach is that the service, it is reaching its target audience in most places. Again, we are got a reasonable good distribution of provision across the county. Our demographic breakdown is representative, with one exception, that's gender. Again, we've got far more female learners than males, but that's the only thing which is slightly out of kilter when you compare it to population. But you'll find that across the piece across adult education. That isn't something which is unique to Cambridgeshire. This is the fourth service I've worked with, and that's always been the case. And we've got a good tutor base, and we work well with partners. I think that's the key with the model, and using things like libraries, etc. I think what are the potential downsides of the current model? There's two which kind of spring to mind. Firstly, is kind of COVID has shown we were quite exposed in being, I wouldn't say over-reliant, but when you're a county-wide service, we're using a lot of community venues. we lost a lot of those. And a lot of those still haven't, reopened to us because they're being used for other things. So that is a challenge. And the second one is, again, is kind of one of the things that we're working to alleviate, but actually is proving an issue for ourselves, is about recruitment. And one of the things with having a county-wide model, we have lost a few members of staff where, the cost of living, the cost of fuel is making it financially unviable for them to sort of have a role which, requires them to go, from Wisbech to Royston, for example.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you both. Anybody else at all? No. Well, thank you very much for answering all our questions and excuse me, for such a thorough report. Really appreciate you being here today. So I'll move on to the recommendations that are A and B. Seems to be a consensus in support. Is there anybody that objects at all? No? Okay, that's good. So no objections. So we'll take those recommendations as carried unanimously. We've been going for about almost 2 hours. So yes, believe it or not, yeah, we started at 10, it's almost 12. It's flying, isn't it? So we'll have a 10-minute break before we go on to the next item. Thank you very much, everyone.
Do.
Hi everyone, I think we're ready to resume. So if you can take your seats, thanks.
That seems a long time ago. It seems like yesterday to me. I was rocking it out in the student unit.
Right, good afternoon everyone. You ready to restart? We're on to item 9, which is the Cambridgeshire Archives Service. Alan Ackroyd, the Archives Manager, will now present a report on the service along with Gary Porter, Head of Libraries, and both are joining us virtually. Hello.
Thank you, Chair. Just to queue up Alan's report, if I may, can I just check that everyone can hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Excellent. So 2 quick observations. One, I think, is the success story that's contained in the report is a real vindication of the Council's decision to build a state-of-the-art archive, which opened back in 2019. And the second observation, it's really down to the hard work of Alan and his team that's made this such a successful service. So at that point, I'm now going to pass to Alan.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be very brief given the time. So this is an informational report just to bring the committee up to date with what's been going on at the in the archive service since we've moved into our new accommodation at Ely. Members will remember that the historical documents for the former county of Cambridgeshire were until 2019 held in the basement of Shire Hall, archives accommodation which was condemned by the National Archives Inspectorate as being unfit for purpose. So the County Council then invested in a new building at Ely, and we cleaned all of our documents and moved them in 2019. And we then formally opened in February 2020. And within a few weeks, we were then impacted by the first lockdown. So our first couple of years haven't gone as we expected them to be honest. Section 2.9, you will see that we have discussed the trends that we've seen in our usage figures over the past couple of years. You'll see that there's been a decline in physical footfall of visitors actually coming to the archives to look at the documents themselves. But this is matched by a rise in the number of people who seem to be contacting us remotely and paying for archive staff essentially to carry out the research on their behalf, and also to pay for high quality digital copies of documents. So income from the virtual use appears to have risen. I have been discussing this with my colleagues in other county archive services across the region, and they're seeing similar things. So we do think that this is a genuine change in the user landscape. The other thing which I need to do before you start discussing the paper is I need to bring you up to date about paragraph 2.8. Back in April, we applied to the National Archives for accredited archive status, and we expected the process for this to carry on through the summer, because there's an initial visit by the National Archives, which is usually then followed by kind of follow-up questions, occasionally even follow-up visits, which is why we thought that the timing of this particular report would be fortuitous. Because we were hoping that the committee would indeed endorse our application, recommendation B, and we would then feed that back to the National Archives Accreditation Panel as evidence of the committee's support for the written documentary heritage in the county. But the National Archives have moved quicker than we anticipated. And after their visits, in fact, they had no clarification questions they needed to ask or any follow-up visits, and they've already decided. So I'm happy to be able to say that we heard last week that we are now an accredited archive service with the full seal of approval from the National Archives. It does mean I do have to apologise to you, Chair, that recommendation B is now slightly out of date. So that's all I'll say by way of introduction to the report. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, both. That's fine. That's good news. Any questions at all from anyone? Hilary and then Jan.
Mainly congratulations, I think, from all of us. I think that's fantastic news. And we know when we're talking about bringing communities together and place building and democracy, that knowing about our local heritage and being involved in our local history is absolutely important, you know, to relate to that, to shape our futures. I can love the archive service hugely forever. I'm really excited about that. I wondered, Alan, if there'd been any issue with the heat wave at all, if that had impacted at all with any of the storage, archiving, or whether or not everything's, you know, we think that about cooler weather. Did the heat wave impact at all?
Everything's fine at Ely. So this was the first real test of the new archives accommodation at Ely, and the store at Archive here at Ely was easily the best place to be on Monday and Tuesday. It was lovely and cool and dry in there. We have had slight problems with the storage at Huntingdon. The Huntingdon Archive store was built in 2009, so the air conditioning equipment there is 13 years old now. And that did waver above the upper limit, but colleagues in FM say that they're on that. They'll sort that out for us. But yes, our new store at Ely has worked perfectly.
Your lesson is we all go and visit the archives on really hot days. And yeah, that would have been welcome there. So we've got Jan next, then Claire, then Henry.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I would like to say and congratulations as well. I was fortunate to go and visit it when it first opened, and it is an absolutely amazing place. So well done to all the staff there.
Thank you. I'll pass it on to the team. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Claire, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, for 4 years, I was a district council representative on the county archives. I never get I never get the acronym correct. It's KGAL, so you'll have to help me, Alan, with that, even though I sat on it for 4 years. County Advisory Service on Archives and Local Studies. Which I think has done really good work. And I think maybe the committee at some point would like to hear more about the work of that group on which Hilary and Piers now sit. But very specifically on the report, I'm really pleased to know about the accreditation. And as you said, it's a real seal of approval. I think the Archive Service deserves to be better known. I think people tend to know more about libraries than archives, but they're two quite distinct, separate services. Yes. And in terms of the service that's offered in Ely, it's a huge improvement on what was available in the Old Shire Hall. And I can say that as a user myself of the service in the Old Shire Hall. I just wondered, Alan, if you could comment on staffing now and where you are with staffing, with resources in that area.
We are quite thinly stretched at the moment. We have lost quite a lot of staff over the past 3 restructures. Since 2011, I think, but we are committed to keeping both record offices open, which means that essentially we kind of alternate the opening at Huntingdon and Ely. So Ely is open on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. Huntingdon is open Monday and Tuesdays and Fridays. We do try and open both offices on the same day on Tuesday, but this kind of alternating of the staff moving from one place to the other is kind of the only way that we can keep both record offices open. We are in quite an unusual situation that we are trying to run 2 county record offices on a team which is probably only big enough for one, but it's important to us, I think, that we do keep Huntingdon's own archives actually in Huntingdon. I mean, Huntingdonshire used to be a former county. There's lots of support there to keep Huntingdonshire's records actually in Huntingdon. So we're happy to go along with that. We are currently attracting grant funding for a project archivist. So that will bump the team up by 1, I hope, in order to catalogue the records of the Dukes of Manchester who lived in Kimbolton. So we've got grant funding from the Huntingdonshire Local History Society and from the Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire Family History Society and Kimbolton Local History Society as well. So with this grant funding, we hope to recruit a project archivist as well.
Thanks, Alan. I think it's interesting to hear that the range of the work that you're doing. And also in the report, you've mentioned at 2.7.2, the institutional and official users. And I think very often there's a perception that archives are sort of dusty old records that have lain there for hundreds of years. But actually pointing out the important work that you've been doing on the 2 enquiries recently, I think highlights the importance of keeping a good archive service going and keeping it going well.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Henry, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on the accredited archive status. I mean, other than obviously an improved status for the county of Cambridgeshire, I was wondering if there's anything more tangible that actually came with achieving that accreditation, i.e. is Cambridgeshire more likely to be successful in bidding for money nationally, for example, or are there any other benefits other than being able to put a little badge on our email footers?
Well, yes, it does. It does open up more grant funding opportunities for us. It's actually quite hard for an archive service which isn't accredited to actually apply for some of the more national cataloguing funding grants that are available. So that's certainly helps us from that point of view. It helps us, with putting in grants to the National Lottery, for instance. But also it kind of pays off in the long run as well, because accreditation itself is like an ongoing kind of ratcheting up process. It's the means by which the National Archives aims to improve the quality of archive services across the country through time. So, we're accredited now, but each time, after 3 years, we have to reapply, and the National Archives kind of ratchets up its expectations each time. So this will work in the long run because it forces us to actually continually improve our service to our users.
Thank you. Any other comments before we go to the recommendations? So, Philippa.
Thank you. I was good to read in 3.4 that you are able to provide hands-on sessions. I think it's very sensible that we are moving so online, and there's a tremendous amount of learning going on by people accessing your online services. My husband seems to spend most of his time in his study looking things up online in that sort of area. There's something magical though about the real thing. Yes. Whether it's newspapers or others. And I would like very much to visit the Ely archives as soon as possible, not just to be cool, Mr. Chairman, but because I've only been to the one in Cambridge, and I'm glad it's more central now and it's more within the reach of more people. But also just to see just how accessible it is, how much you need to know what you're looking for before you look for it. Because sometimes you make the great discoveries by mistake, don't you? But I'm glad you're doing some hands-on. I'd be glad to know how that's organised. And do you just wait to be asked? Are you noticing any areas where the schools aren't taking you up on the offers? Can we help as councillors?
Yes, we're not approached by as many schools as we would like, really. I mean, that was the main driver behind establishing our National Lottery funded Great History Chase project in the first place, was to actually try and engage with primary school children, which is a sector that we'd never kind of engaged with before. We'd done some engagement with secondary school children and some with university students, of course. But we think that, we preserve these documents for everyone, and that includes children of primary age. So it was good from our point of view to be able to try and think of how to use documents in different ways. So we're using documents to kind of promote quizzes and things. And, can you find the things in the mobile bays? So we've got little primary age school children running around the stacks trying to find the secret letters that I have to make a word from and everything. This kind of means a lot to us to actually see everyone being able to use documents in kind of more imaginative and innovative ways than simply just academics using things in the way they always have done. And because these sessions went really well, we'd like these to continue. I mean, we now have all of our education resource packs all written, quizzes ready to go. At the moment, we're kind of still relying on the tick over from the previous schools that have visited during the project. So, some of those are coming back with, with new year groups to redo things. But I agree, we would like to see kind of more schools involved. We would be happy to engage with more schools.
Hilary, you wanted to come in?
Thank you. I just wanted to add to the examples of what you could do, actually. Alan, when I worked at one of the museums, you came, or somebody from the archives, your archives, came and gave a talk about, it was an LGBTQ talk and included magazines and documents and minutes from so many meetings around Cambridgeshire, giving LGBTQ history. It was absolutely fantastic, and just how it could support our equalities work and engage so many different people in shared histories. I think it's quite boundless, really, that what you can give support to with the archive service you have.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move to the recommendations, and recommendation B, tweak that slightly. At the moment it says endorse the current application for accredited archive status. Yeah, so I think we'll put welcome achievement of accredited archive status if people are happy with that. Yeah, that's good. So there seems to be consensus around that. Anybody object? No. So I'll take that as approved unanimously. Thank you very much, Gary and Alan. Appreciate it, and good to see you. We'll be online, but keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Move on to item 10, which is the Domestic Abuse Act 2021. Our 1-year update. Julia Cullen is joining us online.
Yeah,
welcome, Julia.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm here to sort of update you on the progress that we've made during the year. Members will remember that there's a statutory duty now placed on the County Council by the Domestic Abuse Act 2021, which came out in April last year. And I'm here to update you on what we've done to meet that duty and what we've achieved in the past year. So the duty was on Tier 1 authorities to undertake a needs assessment, focusing on safe accommodation provision for victims of domestic abuse, also to convene a multi-agency partnership board and to publish a strategy. So that needs assessment and strategy were both completed and published last year, and members will remember the strategy being presented for approval at committee in September. A partnership board was already in existence, so the membership was amended slightly to comply with the legislation and to ensure that we had housing representation. The Act also led to a grant of just over 1.1 million for Cambridgeshire County Council for provision of specialist support with regards to safe accommodation. And then that was in 2021 to 2022. And then there's been further funding of a similar level for this current financial year and the provision for the next year as well. In future years, this will be incorporated into the overall grant from the government to the local authority, and it is not going to be statutorily ring-fenced. To date, the funding has been used for the following. So we have recommissioned our 3 refuges across Cambridge during the past year. We've also had additional security and safety measures in victims' homes through our target hardening service. We've also got our outreach or mobile advocacy support for victims. And then we've also set up housing IDVAs as well, independent domestic violence advisors that sit within our existing team, but link with the housing associations and housing providers to provide them with specialist support there. We also provide support to children. We've also been able to support those with no recourse to public funds and also provide therapeutic interventions. Currently, we are in the process of recommissioning our outreach or mobile advocacy service with a expected start date of October 2022, and we're also recommissioning our target hardening service to start in the new year. We've also explored dispersed accommodation, but we didn't identify any suitable providers through our tendering exercise earlier in the year. So we're now exploring other options to move that forward. In terms of other updates on what's happened in the past year, we've also been successful in receiving some additional funding for our independent domestic violence advisors through the Ministry of Justice and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, which equates to an additional 5.4 posts within the team. We've also been able to secure money to set up 3 perpetrator programmes, again through the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. We now have a stalking project, a healthy relationships programme and a child to parent abuse programme as well. We've also had a new pathway set up during the last year through which medium risk referrals from the police where a crime has been committed are now received by our IDVA service in order for victims to be contacted where they have consented for that to happen. We also have 2 child to parent abuse advisors sitting within the IDVA service as well, who can support parents where they might be experiencing abuse from a child. We've also in 2021 set up a centralised process for domestic homicide reviews, which has worked very well across the last year. Sadly, we have had 5 domestic homicide reviews taking place during that year, but it has led to a much smoother process for those to be set up and happen and ensure for consistency across the whole of the county. Lastly, one of our sort of key drivers is around preventative work. There is a sort of lack of evidence around interventions to prevent domestic abuse, but this is something that the Home Office are considering at the moment, and we are intending to bid into a fund that they have available, which will set up some projects around that area, which will then be evaluated. We've also moved our current work to focus more on early intervention and preventative work through the provision of health IDVAs, young people's IDVAs, and also our work through the work with the PSHE service and also through schools. So I hope that's a good summary of the key points of everything we've achieved during the past year. And back to you, Chair, for any questions.
Thank you very much, Julia. Any questions? Claire and then Philippa.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I have a question about the domestic homicide reviews 2.14. I know that there have been in the past issues about funding these because they're a statutory requirement from the Home Office, but the Home Office doesn't provide any funding. So could you perhaps talk us through how these have been funded? The 5 DHRs, the 3 in Fenland and 2 in South Cambs, and where county funding has fitted in with these.
Yes, absolutely. And we are still sort of campaigning to the Home Office to get that funding on a more secure footing. What we have with our community safety partners is to create a pooled budget. So the responsibility for domestic homicide reviews sits with the community safety partnerships, of which obviously we have 5 across Cambridgeshire for each of the districts. And what we have managed to get agreement for is that each of the partners from the community, from the CSP, will contribute towards a pooled budget. So the county council, all of the district councils contribute towards that, and then also contribution from the police, and from the what was the CCG, and also I'm forgetting the last partner. There is one other that contributes towards that as well. So we have a pooled budget to undertake those. Obviously, we don't know how many domestic homicide reviews we are going to get within any one year. So we have an agreement that there will be a certain amount, and then we will carry forward that money if we haven't spent it within that year, and can then adjust the amount of money that is required for the future, for the next year.
Yeah, yes, thanks very much. That's a good, helpful explanation. I would just really emphasise the need to keep on pressing the Home Office for the funding. I mean, these terrible occurrence when a domestic homicide happens, and the amount of work and time and the detail that has to go into the reviews is great. And the people who do the reviews, that it's an impressive and very important piece of work. And I think that we really just surprises me that the Home Office doesn't put more funding into these, and it must be a national problem. We can't be the only county that's dealing with this. And I wonder if we could perhaps do something more about contacting the Home Office over it.
I think we'll take
just to add, I was going to say it's certainly been a recommendation in a couple of recent domestic homicide reviews that have gone to the Home Office, but absolutely, I completely agree. If there's any more that we can be doing to champion the Home Office on that point, we would certainly be in agreement.
Something I think we need to prioritise as part of our work here, definitely. Jan, and Jan's next. Did you want to come in as well?
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you, Tom. I actually sit on the Fenland Community Safety Partnership. Unfortunately, it's this morning, it's clashed once again with this committee, as it did 3 months ago. So I have actually asked the new chairman of the Communities and Partnership to please make sure it doesn't clash with this committee again, because it is such an important committee. And unfortunately, I can't split myself in 2 parts.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen, for that. Hilary.
Thank you. Yeah, feeling on you on the need to clone ourselves sometimes. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's fantastic work. The social housing providers, Julia, what does it mean? Who does that go? What's being explored now? If you couldn't find that link for the dedicated units of accommodation, that was one question. If that's just me not quite understanding it, I think. And the other was, that's fantastic that you're going to have a new post as well. Is there a specific role within the team for that new post, or is it extending the work that you're doing at the moment? Please.
So the first point, Hilary, in terms of the dispersed accommodation, at the moment we are going to registered social landlords and our housing associations across Cambridgeshire to see if they've got any properties that they might be able to sort of provide us for. And the procurement advice that we've received is, because we've already sort of gone out for an open tender, we can approach people now directly to see if there is that to do that. There's a lot of sort of legal bits to sort of contend with in terms of is the county council allowed to be a landlord and all those sorts of things that we're sort of trolling through at the moment. But we are sort of positive that we are going to be able to find a solution. It's just taken a little bit longer than we expected it to be. And the second question, what was it you were referring to?
Did you say that you've got some funding for a new post within the team? Did I misunderstand that?
So we've
got.
got.
Understand it completely.
I think she's going to.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say we've had funding through the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office for a number of posts that sit within the Independent Domestic Violence Advisor Service. So we've got some additional posts there. We've got a specialist BAME IDVA. We've got an additional young persons IDVA. We've got a senior IDVA to support with our management structure. And we've also got a male victims IDVA as well. So there are sort of specialist posts that we've got additional funding for that sit within the service.
I think that's fantastic. Fantastic news. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else at all? Sorry, Philippa, yeah.
Yes, my question was to do with 2.6 as well. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody in this room that it's really hard to have accommodation kept free in Cambridgeshire when we know how long the waiting lists are. I'm glad you're still keeping trying though, but nobody could criticise you for finding it hard. When you put this out to tender, if we're looking for somewhere safe and warm and local for people, did you take into account the possibility of hotel accommodation?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm actually speaking because I have no experience of it, and that's got lots of things that would be wrong with it. Do correct me, please.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We already use hotel accommodation, and it is great to have that option. And certainly in an emergency, that is going to be much safer for someone than staying in their own property in a lot of cases. But obviously it isn't always ideal because people are in one room, they haven't got access to kitchen facilities sometimes and those sorts of things as well. So we do use that hotel accommodation, and we will continue to use that because it is a good option in terms of an immediate emergency. We need to move somebody very quickly, but in terms of a sort of a bit of a longer term solution, it's obviously not ideal, and we would like something that is more suitable to victims' needs, particularly if they've got family members with them.
If I could perhaps come back on that, have we in any way reached out to hotel businesses for a style of self, the sort of self accommodation where you do have some ability to look after your own family and you've got kitchens and so on? So rather like an Airbnb or whatever, that they could actually devote a small number of their rooms, or even just one, that had accommodation for looking after themselves as well.
Yeah, we haven't, and that's a very good idea. So I will definitely make a note of that and see if we can explore it and see if it's a possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. Good idea. Okay, so I didn't see any other speakers, so we'll appears to be again consensus in support of the recommendations. I don't see any objections, so we'll take those as carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Julia, and keep up all the good work.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
So we move on to item 11, which is the performance report. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I'm back. So this, members will know, is not a performance monitoring report as such as the title might indicate, but actually is a report asking the committee to improve a suite of key performance indicators for ongoing monitoring. Members are reminded that we have a new performance framework overall for the authority driven by the revised corporate strategy, and therefore committees were asked to review the key performance indicators that related to the services under their purview. At the last meeting of COSMIC, or at the end, we held a workshop on the 14th of April where officers from the individual services that are under the remit of the committee proposed a suite of KPIs, and we had wide-ranging discussions about the benefits of looking at particular KPIs or otherwise. And on that basis of that discussion, the revised KPI suite is now presented within this paper at 2.2, with the rationale for each of the indicators and any changes in the narratives at 2.3 and subsections below. Given the genesis of that was rather deliberative and involved members, I hope we can make this part of our KPI suite now and make them part of our regular reporting cycle. Members are reminded, of course, that just seeing these KPIs on a regular basis doesn't obviate the need and the benefit of receiving regular reports from each service, such as we've had at this meeting today. Finally, members are asked, and committees asked, to agree the transfer of some of the elements of the joint agreement action plan, which has previously been monitored at strategy and resources, to this committee. Although I'll make a personal comment about H9, which I will be taking up with colleagues because I'm not sure why that has landed here. But H9 is regarding young carers, and there's clearly a role for the Youth and Community Service, but whether it is our lead is a matter for detail. But broadly, we should accept, the recommendation is to accept these, the transfer of these indicators. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Tom. Can I just ask, I think it's a typo, 1.5, at its March meeting 2002. I'm assuming that is a typo. But apart from that, I'm sure you'll correct it. A good document.
Thank you, Councillor. I was a mere child back in 2002, so yes, it is a typo. I'll correct it.
Thank you. And that workshop was great. So I should probably remember this, but I don't quite. So just looking at the inclusion indicators that have been removed, and I'm going to assume that that's because inclusion runs through all of the strands. But could you just give me a little clue on? Yeah, just update me, please.
That's right, Councillor. And the discussion, I think, at the time was around the removal of cross-cutting indicators that were effectively outcomes that related to the whole swathe of council activity, and to focus much more on key performance indicators on the services under our purview. And as you rightly say, a number of issues like inclusion, diversity must run through everything that we do.
Okay, who's next? Who would like to comment? No. Okay. That was nice and quick. So again, consensus on the recommendations. So I declare that they're carried unanimously. Thank you very much, unless anybody disagrees. Thank you. So item 12 is the Finance Monitoring Report. Claire Andrews will now present. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here with 2 finance monitoring reports for your, because you've all been good, you deserve 2 finance monitoring reports this time. So you've got, firstly, we've got item 12, which is the finance monitoring report to the end of May. So that's the one for the current year. It's the most recent one that was available for this committee. Clearly we have ended June and we're fastly getting to the end of July. So I just thought it was worth mentioning that in the June report, there's no changes to this one, which is the main report. So we're still reporting a balanced position. So that's the position to the end of May and also to the end of June. The more detailed breakdown, if you want to have a look at that, is on page 167 of your agenda pack. But the main ones are listed in the covering report. We haven't got any outturns to report yet to the end of May. The only thing that we are bringing to attention is that we want to keep a particular monitor on the public library service at this moment. That's a service that has an income target. Clearly, as a result of COVID, there's less people visiting libraries. There also are less people hiring out the library's facilities, such as their meeting rooms for things. Some things are still online, etc., etc. So it is an area that they're working hard on to try and recover a level of income prior to that of the pandemic. But at this moment in time, that is a work in progress. So that's just an area we wanted to flag as something that if they're not able to recover that level of income, we may be coming to you in a future month to say that they may have a overspend at the end of the year. That will be as a result of an under recovery of income. No, it's not that they're spending more, it's that they're getting less income. So that was just to flag that one. So yeah, happy to, if Paul has anything else to say or comments and questions, thank you.
Thank you, Claire. You have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Probably a very naive question, so excuse me. With fewer people using libraries and difficulties in hiring out the accommodation, as you mentioned, wouldn't it be possible then to revise down the target rather than show continually an underspend? Because I would have thought that it would be quite some time before we get back to normal, or maybe there will not be another normal. Is there a possibility of just revising down the target?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it's a matter of the timing of it and how long the pandemic's sort of dragged along, and the impacts of that have maybe dragged along longer than we might have expected. So if we were going to adjust that income target for the current year that we're in, we would have had to have been making that adjustment to the business plan this time last year. So it's kind of in the forward planning when we were looking at 22-23 as a year last summer and last autumn. We weren't really thinking that those impacts were potentially going to carry on as long as that. So I think definitely for the future years, it's something to keep in mind, and for the libraries to keep in mind in their future planning and service planning as well.
Thank you. Anybody else? Philippa.
Yes, just to follow on the point made by Councillor Daunton. I mean, we've been delighted how quickly our local library has bounced back in terms of usage and hiring of the associated meeting rooms. But on the other hand, as a public place, we clearly have to lead from the front. And if we do get another setback in COVID or something like that, we obviously cannot hesitate to do that. And I'm sure officers aren't going to worry too much about KPIs when they're making decisions on hopefully other criteria. So the fact you're drawing it to our attention leads, it means we're, ready for a bit of a disappointment, and we're not trying to we obviously won't keep taking excuses, but I think we do need to support the staff in their decisions to close or take precautions as they do. Thank you.
I think that's a really good point. And I think that as ever, we would really like to have a crystal ball when we're doing the forecast outturn reporting. Unfortunately, we don't, and clearly things could change further with the COVID situation.
I think we'll have to look out for a budget bit for a crystal ball then from, fair enough.
That will be handy. Anybody else? No? Okay, so the recommendation is just to review and comment on the report. So I think we can agree that that's been done. So we'll take that as carried. And you're on again, Claire, with 13, which is the outturn for 21-22.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, we're going back in time a little bit now to bring you the finance monitoring report for the outturn for the close down period. So the final position of 21-22 to the end of March this year. So overall, so there's a little bit more to report on this one. So overall, as a service, we had an overspend of 198,000 for the lines that relate to this committee. And so again, on page 201 of your agenda pack, you can see the breakdown of that if anyone wants to look at it in a little more detail than it's listed in the covering report. So you'll see there was sort of several smaller ones by which I'm kind of judging that as being under 100,000, but the ones that stood out as being over or under by more than 100,000. So we had the strategic management line for communities and partnerships. That was as a result of some savings that are yet to be made in a permanent manner. So that's something that Paul and I are working on together to put a plan together for that at the moment to make sure that they're made permanently for future years. We have the public library services, so basically back to the same things I was saying about the potential impact on this year. They did impact last year to the tune of them having an overspend of 195,000. And then we had the registration service. They were underspent by 151,000 at the end of the year. That's mainly as an over recovery of income. So they charge fees for their services. There was quite an uptake in the booking of wedding ceremonies, sort of as a result of the backlog of people putting that off and then booking them in the last financial year, sort of after the pandemic after some of the restrictions were lifting. So that resulted in more income into the registration service in the last year. They also had some vacancy savings as well, so some posts that were vacant in there. And lastly, the coroner service had an overspend of 159,000, again relating to the pandemic. So they're all services really that have been hit by the pandemic. So quite a lot of our costs have gone up, particularly post-mortem and mortuary costs from the hospital because of the increased PPE that's required for those. So some of those unit costs have gone up as a result of the pandemic. And clearly some of the demand has gone up, and there are some complex cases in there at the moment as well. So they were the major ones, and then the others, you can see them listed there also. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Could I ask a question that's tangential to this concerning the okay, sorry. You might want to stop me asking this question, Chair, but let me put it. It's a question that's tangential to what you've just been saying, and it's about the registration service. So the registration service, some of the wedding ceremonies take place in the archives room, I think, in Ely. And I don't know whether there's been any thought about re-provision of space for weddings, and whether that will have a knock-on effect on the income coming in for wedding services.
Just factually, my understanding is that there are no current plans to separate out those services. That's a result of a previous decision to save money by co-locating them.
Can I just add something there? Can I just add that the registry office the Cambridge registry office that's being built in Arbury is looking lovely. If anybody fancies a look around that at some point, it's looking wonderful.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, Paul.
Just thank you, Chair. Just one other point regarding the coroner service. Claire's explained the reason for overspending that particular year, but it's probably opportune to flag to members that both demographic pressures and changes in the nature of types of inquests that are being undertaken are also providing ongoing pressures on the coronial service, and it's likely there will be a business case for enhanced investment in that service coming along in due course.
Okay, thank you very much. So we appear to all be in agreement with the recommendations. So I think we'll take those as carried unanimously in case anybody has any objections. We're doing well today, aren't we? So thank you very much, Claire. Thanks for your report. And you'll be pleased to know we are on the final item, item 14, which is the training plan, appointments to outside bodies, internal advisory groups, etc., panels, member champions. So just moving through the recommendations, we're being asked to review the agenda plan and training plan. Are there any comments or questions on either of those two from anyone? No, that's good. So appointments to outside bodies at Appendix 3, that lists the current appointments. And I understand there's going to be some changes. The ESOL local planning partnership proposed that Councillor Bulat is appointed to the South Partnership, Councillor Hoy to the North Partnership. Anybody else have any changes at all? Philippa?
Thank you. It's a general question, really. When it comes to outside bodies, who does it? How do you go about abolishing one? Because I'm on one that is being agreed locally is really not particularly useful. It's a bit of an historical turnover. It's Clay Farm Centre, which started off having a management committee. My leader is making faces at me.
They're meant to abolish themselves, I don't know.
I think you can just let Michelle know and she'll take it off the list.
Yeah, let Michelle know. Yeah.
Right, okay. I'll obviously need to make sure that other people know that too, but thank you.
Sorry, Ross, go on. Yeah.
Can we have Councillor Daunton replacing Councillor Thompson on libraries, and myself replacing Councillor Thompson on the Cultivate Assessment Panel. And I had spoken to Councillor Taylor about the St Neots Museum, and she was happy with that, as I forwarded the email to Nick today.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. Also, we've got the County Advisory Group on Archives and Local Studies, just to align with political proportionality. We need 2 Conservative members to replace the 2 current independent appointments. Is that something you want to think about? Oh, you feel Nick, brilliant. Brilliant, thank you, that's great. So with that, we finally just need to appoint a community safety champion, and we're happy to reappoint Councillor Cox-Condren. I think we probably are, assuming you'd want to continue. We're happy with that? Yeah, excellent. So that, I think, brings us to the end of the agenda. Thank you for your fortitude, everyone. I told Councillor Batcher we'd finish by 1 o'clock. We've got 4 minutes to go, so we'll just talk amongst ourselves for 4 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, sweet. Yeah, exactly. So our next meeting is scheduled for the 1st of November, sorry. And thank you very much for your attendance. Safe journey home. Thank you.
Thank you.